Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is no gods, no masters in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, The Aftermath. Damn triads. Korra winced, moving a handful of water over the side of her face to mend her jaw. It was helping, but it wasn't nearly as effective as having someone else do it. Minghua had never taught her a great deal of healing, preferring to focus on combat forms and leaving Korra to study healing scrolls on her own. Asami's injuries had been simple, a bit of singing on her fingertips and a cut or two on her scalp, and now she was resting on Korra's bedroll below deck. Korra's hip and jaw were healed enough to allow her to walk and talk without pain, but she would need to visit a healer to finish the process. She sighed and rubbed her shoulder with her free hand. With her armor neatly tucked away under the stairs leading up to the deck, she was fully mobile again, for all the good it did her. She had inspected herself in the mirror, and she had taken more of a beating than she originally thought. In addition to the large, swelling bruise taking up most of the right side of her face, the entire right side of her body was a canvas of splotching purple. Welts had formed on her arm and side where chunks of earth struck her, and her hip and leg were no better. Her armor had done its job, preventing any broken bones and providing enough compression to allow her to work through the pain, but without it she had struggled to stay standing long enough to heal the worst of the bruising. With a flick of her wrist, the water in her hand snaked back to the container by her armor. She debated changing the wraps on her chest and arms, but decided against it until she could get to a healer. Instead she put her clothes back on, gingerly easing into the pants and jacket to avoid her remaining bruises, and planted herself beside her bedroll. Asami's face had turned to a frown, and she continually twisted from side to side. She had slipped from unconsciousness to sleep at some point during the night, and then into a nightmare. Korra knew the signs well. Pili would have them until Korra or Minghua woke her up, and she had her own visions of the fire that had engulfed her home and her parents. Korra gently ran her hand through Asami's hair, and the bit of contact seemed to assuage her after a few minutes. She turned toward Korra's hand, reaching up for it with her own. Her gloves were folded up near the bedroll, removed so Korra could heal her burn blisters, and she found Korra's hand, lacing up their fingers as she did. Heat built up in her face and neck as Asami nuzzled her hand, pulling it down protectively toward her collar. She turned on her side, exposing one shoulder pad and making Korra frown. Equalists. There she was, the Avatar, having dragged away, healed and sheltered an anti-bender for the better part of the night. Light was beginning to filter down to the boat's hold, and she was still worried sick that Asami hadn't yet woken up, to say nothing of what Asami would think of her if she caught Korra bending. Dark, heavy feelings of self-loathing filled her at the thought. "Why did it have to be you?" she murmured. So preoccupied was she with Asami that she had not had the time to reflect on her airbending. As badly injured as she was, she would not have been able to properly walk the Bagua circle, or do much of anything with it now that she wasn't running on adrenaline. Her heart had finally stopped racing, and her eyelids were growing heavier with every passing moment, crying out in protest over the night of lost sleep. "Please wake up, Asami." Korra stroked the outline of her collarbones under her uniform. "Please." Korra. Her breath caught in her throat, and seeing Asami come to and meet her gaze sent her heart racing again. Asami sat up, throwing her arms around Korra and letting her head settle into the crook of her neck. Dull ache radiated from where Asami's head bumped her jaw, but she thought nothing of it, returning the hug as she shook with relief. Neither of them moved for several minutes, and all they could hear was their own ragged breathing and the waves lapping on the hull of the boat. "Are you okay?" Korra finally asked, remembering to breathe and taking in the light, fresh scent of Asami's hair. Soft, delicate fingers stroked Korra's back through the fabric of her jacket, and she shuddered. The rush of relief in her heart shut out everything else, and for the time being there was nothing outside of the hold of her boat. They dislodged from one another and Korra sat back slightly, the worry slowly fading from her face. "Yeah, I'm fine," Asami said, leaning on one hand. "My head is still ringing, but I'm fine. This seems awfully familiar. I think I prefer being the one not waking up in a daze, though. What happened?" "I remember the door coming off its hinges, nothing after. Mako and his people busted in. He shocked the door, but your gloves took most of the damage." Asami nodded, examining the bruise on Korra's face as she did. "He came back for his people." They take care of their own, I'll give them that. Where are we? My boat. I wasn't sure where else I could take you in that getup, Cora said. What about Fu? Is he okay? The guy with the sticks. The triads took him down, but I went back and got him once I got you out of the building. Cora nodded to a bag near the end of the bedroll. He dropped off some clothes for you about an hour ago and asked me to tell you that they cleared everything out of that safe house. A wave rocked the cruiser, and Asami gave a heavy sigh. Did he help you fight some of them? No, they got him right after you. It was 7-on-1, there wasn't time for him to do anything. So you took down 7 triads by yourself, injured. Cora shifted uncomfortably and avoided Asami's gaze. With her worry abated, she wanted to tell someone, anyone, that she had finally managed to airbend, but Asami did not seem like the most receptive audience. There was really no one to tell, she knew. Tenzin would know who she was, and Zahir was likely half a world away. It seemed like the only person who would know was Mako. I had to get you out of there, Cora said with feigned casualness and a shrug. Anger is a great anesthetic. Asami smiled and stroked Cora's unbruised cheek, robbing her of whatever composure she had managed to build up. Well, that's twice you've helped me out of a jam now. At least we were even for a few minutes before they broke down my door. You're pretty amazing, Cora. Thanks, Asami. Every bit of her face that was not bruised went red, flushing under Asami's words and touch. A lopsided grin grew on her lips, and Cora met Asami's hand with her own, relishing in the coolness of her touch until she looked back at her uniform. You're an equalist, Cora said, letting their hands drift down. Yes. Asami pursed her lips and paused for a moment, and then said, well, it's not that simple. I'm the leader of the equalists. Cora managed to keep a straight face as she felt her world fall out from underneath her. It wasn't enough that the girl she was growing attached to was an anti-bender, the universe had to make her their leader. A vice tightened around her chest, and she had to fight the urge to cry. Oh, she mumbled. It's not something I wanted, Asami said, resting against the hull. The whole operation was in shambles, and Fu and some of the others rallied behind me to fill the power vacuum. I wish it had been someone else, I had a company to take over at the same time, but we needed someone to step up after we killed that blood-bending monster. The anger was thick in her voice, and Cora looked guiltily at her own hands. He killed my father. The only family I had left. Her hand tightened into a fist on Cora's lap. I'm sorry, Cora said, feeling herself start to go numb again. She hugged Asami, half to feel her embrace again and half to hide the pain and turmoil betrayed by her expression. They desperately needed something else to talk about. Can I ask you something? How come you were out tonight and found me fighting? There was a demonstration I was making to the council, Asami said, resting in Cora's arms. Or a warning. Depends who you ask. Can I ask you something? Why were you out there tonight? Or are you going to be picking fights with triads every time I see you? She leaned back, and Cora allowed herself a small smirk. Are you going to be seeing me often? I certainly hope so. Cora shifted again and pressed her legs together. Fire flared in her, and she risked losing her calm altogether. I was taking a walk. I've seen pictures of City Hall, but I wanted to see it in person. Stepped into the wrong alley, I guess, and one of them recognized me from Mako's description. They wouldn't walk away like I asked, so fighting was the only option left. One of them ran off for help, and I was going through their backup when you arrived. The next thing I knew, I was waking up with you over me. Sorry again about distracting you. I'm glad you could find it in yourself to forgive me and rescue me again, she said through a grin. My hero. Well, I've read too many old stories to know better than to leave you behind. Way too many. I've read enough books for 1,000 lifetimes. The hero always rescues the princess, I know that much. Cora caught the words as they were leaving and wanted to hide. She knew she was babbling, but Asami only playfully cocked an eyebrow. I'm the princess, then. This isn't a story, you know. You got knocked out, so given the context I mean, not that I'm running around trying to save you or that you can't take care of yourself, but, I'm going to stop talking now, she said, her voice trailing into a mumble. Asami laughed. Don't get yourself all flustered, I don't mind being the princess for the right hero. She looked up at the open hatch to the deck, where more sunlight was breaking through the early dawn. What time is it? A little past sunrise. You slept through the night. And you didn't. Korra shook her head. I wanted to make sure I'd be able to tell you where you were when you came to. So I stayed up. You're too adorable, I have to get into the office, though. Asami stood up and opened the bag Korra had indicated, taking out a change of clothes with one hand and unbuttoning her uniform with the other. Korra looked pointedly away as she undressed, focusing intently on her own boots and trying to ignore the sounds of clothing falling away. A hand rested on her shoulder, and when she turned back Asami was changed and holding out a stack of yuans. It looks like you're healing really well already, but you should still go to a hospital and get yourself fixed up. I know my first aid was no substitute for a doctor. Korra thanked her and pocketed the money while Asami stuffed her uniform into the now empty bag. They went to the stairs, and Asami hugged her quickly once more. Thank you again, Korra. Are you going to be here tonight around sunset? I thought I might bring dinner. Her heart felt as if it flipped upside down. They parted, but Korra wanted to bridge that distance again, feel the softness of Asami's hair on her face, explore her soft, pale skin, her lips. No. It's hardly the time. She shook her head clear. Wouldn't miss it. I'll see you then. With a final look back and a smile, Asami ascended the stairs and left Korra alone in the hold. She heard Asami's footsteps along the deck, and then silence as she jumped to the pier. Korra ran her hand through her hair and let a single tear roll down her cheek. Of all the people to care for, she thought. Of all the people to want to hold and protect and be close to, it had to be an anti-Bender intent on establishing a new government in Republic City, her burden, her sin to atone for. She laughed. The absurdity of it all was almost comical, and the dissonance threatened to make her head spin. Korra collapsed on her bedroll, curling up and taking a deep breath to catch the lingering scent of Asami's shampoo. Tears burst through her resistance, and she finally let herself cry through the laughter. Kija, will you stay still? Mako turned Kija's head forward once more before dabbing antiseptic at the cut on his temple. The waterbender had more cuts and bruises, but the one on his temple was the worst and their only available healer was out of commission. The sooner he stopped fidgeting and wincing at the mild sting, the sooner they could all go home and get an hour or two of desperately needed sleep. You don't have to do this, boss. I'm fine, really. No, you're bleeding. Stay still. But you're bleeding too. Kija was right, he knew. For all the dried blood under his nose and around his mouth, there was still some trickling. It would stop soon, and his black eye looked worse than it felt. Mako ignored him and put down the antiseptic, eliciting a relieved sigh which turned into a yelp when Mako began threading a needle. Hey, what's that for? The stitches, and I swear if you don't stay still I'm going to knock you out and do it that way. With a slightly jumpy Kija watching, Mako rolled the tip of the needle between the tips of his fingers to heat it. It should only need 4 or 5. Close your eyes, hold on to the side of the chair, and if you don't want a jagged scar, then don't move. Kija did as he was told, gritting himself against the sting of the needle. The office went quiet as Mako worked, deftly weaving the sutures into place and working the thread through without damaging the surrounding skin. He tied off the remaining thread and laid a bandage over the wound. Done. See how much faster it goes without the squirming? Keep it clean, don't pick at it and change the bandage every day. Next victim, he said, turning to the row of chairs along the wall, where the rest of the ambush team sat. Kija mumbled his thanks and took the seat left empty by his sister, Bana, as she sat for her treatment. She gave Mako a small, dazed smile as she sat down. A tall, lithe city native, she had come over with Kija from the Red Monsoon Triad during their last internal conflict. Her use in a fight was middling at best, but she was a fine healer, and unafraid to go onto the front lines with her brother. Careful, boss, all of this might make us start thinking you have a heart, Shen said, holding a bag of ice to her shoulder. It was a poor pass at humor, but they had all been up much longer than they should have been, and he appreciated the attempt to lighten the mood. You'd better not, I have my reputation to protect. Mako suppressed a yawn and checked Bana's vision. Her pupils were still dilated, and she was even more ready than him to fall asleep. He knew there was little he could do for her, and having her stay there with the others was mostly a pretense for keeping her awake. Mako reached into a desk drawer, retrieved his wallet, and tossed it to Kija. Go with her to the hospital. Tell them she has a concussion. If they ask, tell them someone on a motorbike clipped her stepping off the curb. He nodded and got Bana up from her chair, putting her arm over his shoulder as they walked out of the office. Come on, sis. I assume the rest of you will live? Mako asked. Cheng, she and Shen all nodded. Good. I think that'll do it. You should get some sleep, Cheng said. The sun's already up. Later. Once I see how the others are doing, and after I see someone on their way to work. That was really airbending, wasn't it, boss? Shen asked. She leaned forward with interest despite the ache in her back, and Mako went around to sit behind his desk. That, or they had the worst draft in history. His joke didn't land. Yes, it was airbending. When she threw her fist out I thought it might have been firebending, or even one of the Equalist's new toys, but that was wind that hit us. And then she started firebending. Are you sure? She made a dagger. He groaned, wishing he had more ice to put over his black eye. I thought she was just some water tribe girl. She's not. She's someone who's supposed to be dead, and she made me say so before she put me back into the wall. Mako spoke slowly, measuring his words, making his meaning perfectly clear. Above them, the overhead light buzzed, deafening in the silence that had fallen over the office. They all shifted in their seats, and Mako steepled his fingers. Avatar Korra. Chapter 7, Old Wounds. Do you have any idea what time it is? Bolin rolled over in bed, tangling the phone cord around himself as he did. Early morning sunlight shone in through the curtains. He buried his face in his pillow to get away from it. His head pounded terribly, and he curled up tighter under the bed sheets. Mornings. Yes, the voice on the phone said. Do you? Not really. The last thing I remember was that fourth round of Beiju and Zuli getting up on the table to dance. And here I thought I was the overindulgent brother. Is there a point to this, Mako? I feel like someone fixed a clamp around my head and you aren't helping. Slowly, clumsily, Bolin unwrapped the phone cord from around his torso and sat up, going for the glass of water he had left himself on the nightstand hours before. It's something big. Can't get into it over the phone. This had better not be another stock tip or anything like that, and if it is I don't want to know about it. We came close enough to getting caught the last time, and you're still on thin ice with Bafong after that Agni Kai massacre. He could almost see Mako scoffing. 3 people is hardly a massacre. It seemed worse than it was because there were a lot of pieces. Already on the verge of throwing up, thank you. Trust me, it's bigger than that. Bigger than anything. Meet me in Hui Square once you drag yourself out of bed. Don't forget that check, either. I have delegates to meet with today. Come see me first. You won't regret it. Yeah. He dropped the phone onto its hook and finished off the glass of water. A morning with Mako and his exciting news, Bolin thought. The day was off to a great start already. He reached under the covers, retrieved a large pillow, and tossed it aside before getting up to make the bed. Parts of his vision were still blurry, and it felt as if someone was throwing rocks around inside his head, but he trudged into the shower all the same. Hot water beat down along his neck and broad back, welcome relief from the stiffness that built up from sleeping in a single position all night. His head was swimming after a few minutes under the shoriad, and he cut it off with a grumble. Never drinking again. Once he had dried himself off, he picked out his best suit, a rich brown jacket with a jade green shirt, and had another glass of water before heading out the door. He stuck himself with his council pin as he went down the stairs to the sidewalk, but managed to suppress his wince. One of their drivers was waiting with his car at the curb, opening the rear door as he approached. Good morning, counselor, she said, ignoring all the signs of his hangover. At least she was professional about it. Vice Chairman Tenzin asked me to remind you of the meeting with the delegates from the Jinshu province. He left some note cards on them with me, they're in the back seat. There's also a budget vote, and you're scheduled to lead a tour of City Hall after that. Bolin nodded. What was your name again? May, sir. I'll let him know you did your due diligence, May. But I don't need the car this morning, I'm going to walk. Hopefully the fresh air will do me some good. Sir, the meeting is starting in half an hour. The vice chairman was very concerned about punctuality, more so than usual. The phrase, vitally important, was thrown around quite a bit in the earlier briefing. I'll be fine. Head off and let them know I'll be there before Tenzin has an aneurysm. The car pulled away from the curb, tiny diplomatic flags fluttering in the breeze. Bolin finally fixed his pin and started along the sidewalk, stopping every so often to shake hands or wave to someone calling his name. The wind helped the pounding in his head, but the recognition made him feel even better. His people, his streets, his city. A small smile grew on his face. City Hall was only a short walk from his house, but Hui Square required a lengthy detour through the capital district and into a neighborhood that bumped up against an industrial park. He knew it well, but normally he would have no good reason to go anywhere near it. As he neared City Hall, most of the faces on the street became familiar, belonging to people that worked close to the council. He made a few quick greetings to the ones whose names he remembered as they waited at a stoplight, when someone bumped into him, jostled by the crowd. Sorry. She backed up slightly, and Bolin looked over at her. He knew her from somewhere, a Water Tribe girl with strikingly blue eyes, turned away from the wind. Cute, even with her oddly short hair. It was still far too early in the morning for picking out memories, though. It's fine. Do you work around here? I feel like we've met before. The girl looked down at his council pin and nodded slowly. Her stance shifted, belating her body so that her side was facing him more than her front. We met briefly on Air Temple Island last week, counselor. I'm Cora. That's right. Sorry, I had a long night. Cora turned to look at the traffic, and when she did Bolin saw a long, dark bruise that snaked from her jaw, down her neck, and out of sight beneath her jacket. Are you okay? I'm fine. I had a long night, too. She wavered back and forth on her heels before speaking again. You wouldn't happen to know any good healers, would you? There's one about half a block back that way, it's a small white building. They'll help you out. Thank you. Cora receded from the waiting group as the light changed, and when Bolin looked again, she was gone. Cute girl, he thought. He shrugged and blanched when he saw the clock on the front of a building across the street. Their meeting was looming ever closer. His pace picked up until he was about to hit a jog, running into the breeze, and the slow tinge of regret at not taking the car stung almost as much as his headache. When he arrived, Hui Square was much as he remembered it from all their years panhandling near the street and sleeping under the monument at the center. His brother was there, leaning on one side of the monument, while several of his triads watched over him at a distance. He felt their eyes on him as he approached, but they were waved off. Bolin went up to his brother and noticed his black eye and the dried blood under his nose. Mako, you look like hell. Good morning to you too, Bolin. Seriously, what happened? He asked, looking over Mako's face. Did you sneak into the zoo and try to wrestle a badger mole again? I had a small disagreement with Asami. This looks even worse than your breakup. Did she get you with some of that anti-bending stuff, too? She demonstrated it for us last night. Lin was ready to kill her. No, it wasn't her, Asami just happened to be there. Then who? Mako took a look around to ensure they weren't being listened to. The Avatar. Bolin was silent for a moment, studying Mako's furtive expression, then cocked an eyebrow. They haven't found the new Avatar, Mako. Are you saying some kid crossed in from the Earth Kingdom and beat you up? He smiled slightly, which only made Mako more serious. They won't find them because the last one is still alive. She tore through almost a dozen of my people with nothing but chi blocking, and then she started airbending and firebending. You do the math. The last Water Tribe Avatar died, bro. You're not listening. She's here, in Republic City, and she told me herself. I ran into her while I was getting my people back from Asami and her goons. They were, I don't know, they might have been working together. His story was patently ridiculous, but he seemed so certain and spoke with such conviction that Bolin didn't know what to make of it. I think you hit your head a little too hard. Why would the Avatar be working with anti-benders? None of this makes sense. Mako struck the monument beside them. I don't know, okay? This all sounds crazy, but that was Avatar Korra that put me into a wall and carted off Asami last night. Bolin paused and tried to swallow the lump in his throat. What did you say her name was? Korra, why? No reason. Why are you telling me all of this? He gave Bolin a small shrug. Because you're my brother, and if she's got me in her sights then you'll probably get involved somehow. I thought you should know. Look, Mako, this is all pretty weird and I don't have the time to process it right now. I spent weeks trying to get these delegates here and I'm going to be late as it is. Go put some ice on your face and don't pick any more fights with Asami, or I will have Bafeng run you in until you two can act like amicable exes. Don't make yourself a liability to me. If she had anything on me, I'd already be in jail. But I will go home and rest up since you were so nice about asking, he said dryly as he produced a check from his pocket. After I make one more stop. Did you remember? Of course. I know you'd go and break into my house if I forgot, anyway. Bolin produced his own check from inside his jacket, only for the wind to pick back up and sweep them both away. They turned to chase after them, but the checks were already safely beneath a taut length of metal coil. Good morning, Chief. Lin picked up the checks with her coil and gave them a quick glance before Bolin took them back. Jixiang Orphanage. Thank you for catching those. She looked past Bolin and matched Mako's cool gaze. Some girl finally got tired of your awful come-ons. Come on, Chief, you know you're the only woman for me, he said as Bolin handed over the checks. Her disgust was palpable, and Bolin had to resist rolling his eyes. What brings you here, Lin? You, counselor. Everyone else is at the meeting. The governor, lieutenant governor, and foreign minister from Jinshu are waiting in the rotunda, and I'm not going to babysit them, orders or not. Oh, fine. I thought you might like the chance to catch up, I guess not. But how did you find me so quickly? She was a detective, Mako said. Your driver followed you and radioed in. That vein in Tenzin's forehead started throbbing when you didn't arrive on time. Well, so much for May's glowing review, Bolin muttered. All right, let's go, then. We have dinner with everyone tomorrow night, Mako, get yourself cleaned up. He and Lin left in her cruiser, weaving through the traffic to get back in time, and Mako gathered his people before heading out for some much-needed sleep. No longer bothering to even appear to wait for the ferry, Korra sped under the bay and emerged on the Air Temple Island dock. The healer that the counselor suggested had been effective, but took several hours longer than she expected. It was well into the afternoon, and she had surely missed the airbending practice she hoped to observe, but Ikki and Milo were usually willing to demonstrate if she asked nicely. The eastern courtyard was empty as she climbed up the stairs. Everyone was probably still at lunch, she reasoned. Her stomach growled, and she remembered that her last meal had been breakfast the day before. Even that was insubstantial, nothing more than some rice and meat with a cup of tea from a street vendor. Tenzin's wife was always trying to feed her, and the offer was rather tempting, even if it was all vegetarian. Maybe she made those seaweed rolls, On the north side of the courtyard was an overlook of the bay and the smaller island with its statue of the last Avatar. Past the rocks and trees demarcating the end of the courtyard was a sheer drop to a jagged beach and lapping waves below. That was where Korra saw a small, waifish figure in gray, rocking back and forth on her heels while holding onto a branch above her, looking down toward the water. Jinora. Her stomach twisted up when Jinora looked back at her across the yard, her eyes bloodshot from tears, and the world slowed as her hand slipped away from the branch. Blood pounded in her ears. A few longer strands of her hair bounced in front of her face, pushed about by the wind in her movement. Her bag fell to the ground as Jinora disappeared from view. She jumped over the rocks and down the cliff, all thoughts pushed from her mind. The wind whipped at her, salty air stinging her eyes and blurring her sight. Jinora was there, below her and out of reach, a mass of gray against the yellow of the sand and the blue of the water. Korra reached out, narrowing her profile to make herself fall faster. Her fingers brushed the hem of Jinora's robes, and with one massive yank Korra pulled her up and grabbed her around the waist. Falling was a strange thing, Korra thought. Her head grew lighter, something sunk into the pit of her stomach, and she felt the same tingling that ran along her arms and legs whenever she was near Asami. As quickly as she could, she righted herself, no longer caring to hide, and quickly straightened her legs out under her. An inferno erupted beneath her boots, blasting both of them with sweltering heat. Korra lifted Jinora farther to keep her clothes from catching fire as they sunk down to the shoreline, flames turning sand to glass beneath them. When she felt ground underneath her feet again, Korra fell to her knees, trembling and holding Jinora tightly against her. Both of them were crying, and Jinora stayed limp in Korra's arms. "Why?" she mumbled, her voice muffled by Korra's jacket. Korra pushed her back slightly, but Jinora refused to meet her gaze, only staring somberly at the ground between them. "Why? Why?" "Because that fall would have killed you. And you jumped after me? Just like that. Look, I'm not going to call you a fool for trying to kill yourself, I've been there, but that fall might have left you down here with a broken neck until the tides or the birds got to you. I wasn't trying to kill myself," Jinora said, still trying to speak through the tears. She sat down opposite Korra, bringing her knees up under her chin. "Okay, I was thinking about it. My brother and sister are doing so well with their airbending and I can't do anything, so what if I wondered how quick it'd be over?" Korra said nothing. "And then you show up and go calling my name. It startled me. I lost my grip and then you came rushing. You didn't even stop. I saw you running as I fell. Well, I wasn't going to let you hit the ground," she said quietly, looking at the singe marks on her boots. "Do you risk your life a lot for people you barely know? You'd be surprised." Jinora smiled weakly, and Korra stood up to offer a hand. "Come on. Let's go back up." Jinora walked side by side with her, curling into the feeling of Korra's hand on her shoulder. They returned to the pier, still mercifully empty, and started up the steps to the courtyard. "Korra. Why didn't you say that you were a firebender?" Jinora asked. "I said yesterday that I couldn't explain losing bending to a non-bender. Why didn't you correct me?" Her mind raced, and she faked being out of breath for a moment as she collected her thoughts. A firebender hanging around the last air nomads? Might have been awkward. "Oh. I thought you were from one of the water tribes, with the eyes and the skin." "I am," she said automatically, wishing she could reach out and catch the words. Jinora tilted her head. "So, you're a water tribe firebender, going to school in the Earth Kingdom, and researching air nomads, in Republic City." Korra smiled and shrugged. "Try saying that 5 times fast. Listen, do you want to help me with my project? I do kind of owe you." "Yeah, a little bit." They went back to the courtyard, toward the Bagua circle in the center. Korra retrieved her bag and brought it over with her, but rather than pull out her notebook and set herself on a rock, she took up the position opposite Jinora. "Sketching and taking notes are fine, but I learn best by doing. I have to really feel it. Can you walk the circle with me?" Korra asked, bringing herself into her airbending form. "I can, but you're in the Western style," Jinora said, going over to her and nudging her feet into a different position. "That's an exhibition form. You don't use it for walking the circle, it's for dancing or acrobatics, and I don't know it very well, anyway. It's Ikki's specialty. I only know the Eastern style well enough to teach it. Zahir never bothered to tell me I was using the wrong form." Korra thought, annoyance flashing through her. "Oh. I guess my teachers weren't as good as they thought. Why don't you model it for me?" "Okay." She took up a proper stance to let Korra follow suit, and then went over to make corrections. "1 foot forward, but keep them parallel. And your elbows should be in closer to your sides. Back straight, palms out." Korra couldn't help but grin at Jinora's change. With someone to teach, something to impart, at least she could keep from focusing on losing her bending. Maybe she could make that suggestion to Tenzin. "No, you're here to kill him," she told herself. Getting attached to others would only make her task harder. Asami had already proven that. When she was reading about the Equalists before coming to the city, she had decided they were only more tyrants grasping at power and they would have to go as well, given the opportunity. But even with their leader at her mercy, she was helpless to do anything but let her mind race. Asami was only human, like her. Korra? Korra, focus. She shook her head clear and nodded. Right, sorry. So with airbending, you use a lot of the same breath control as in firebending, Jinora said, stepping back to the other side of the circle. In and out, slowly. Focus on the rising and falling of your chest. This style is about meditative concentration and was used defensively, for protecting important things. Start with bringing your hands up over your head and Jinora jumped back and nearly fell as lightning sprung from Korra's fingertips, branching through the air before grounding out beneath them. The slight singed scent of electrically charged air surrounded them for a few moments, and Korra felt her heart race as it always did when she channeled her chi so sharply. She took a step forward, but Jinora kept her distance, nervously watching Korra's hands. You can bend lightning. I didn't mean to, she said nervously, keeping still so that Jinora wouldn't back away. It's the same breath control elements. Won't happen again, I promise. With another furtive glance at Korra's hands, Jinora resumed her position on the other side of the circle. I guess you were right about the awkwardness. Let's try again. They ran through their breathing exercises once more, with Korra carefully tamping down her chi to keep it from erupting in flames or lightning again. With slow, steady motions, they began making a counterclockwise circuit. Jinora would make light corrections to Korra's stance or the position of her arms, and she marveled at how remarkably different it felt. It was the same routine, the same steps, but with the proper form she could almost feel the energy surging through her. She closed her eyes, reveling in the sensation. What is that? Her eyes snapped open, looking at her hands and expecting cinders, but instead a small vortex had formed in the middle of the circle, swirling as they moved around it. Korra stopped dead, as did Jinora, and the air dissipated as she looked at her trembling hands. There needs to be a bigger difference between the feelings of firebending and airbending, Korra thought ruefully. I can airbend again, she asked, more to herself than to Korra. How? She looked at Korra, who provided no response, and then ran into the temple while yelling excitedly for her family. With sorrow and the painfully familiar feeling of self-hatred mounting, Korra ran. Chapter 8, When Extremes Meet. The month was hard for Korra. Watching Jinora's mood come crashing back down when she failed to airbend again wrenched her heart and made her observations almost harrowingly awkward. Her family didn't know what to make of her assertion that she could bend again, and every time Korra saw Jinora trying fruitlessly she hated herself more and more. It became so bad that she cut her observations from every day to every other day, and then to once or twice a week. To start compiling her research, she said. Instead her notebook remained open to her sketches in the hold of her boat, propped up so she could practice airbending in private. In the rest of her time, she either explored the city or found herself getting closer to Asami. Some days she did nothing but find small side streets or bound between rooftops, and soon she knew the Bay District as well as she knew the hold of her boat. She did the same on the nights when she had no plans, and before long she was almost preternaturally aware of which streetlights flickered, which made annoying buzzing sounds, and which needed to have their bulbs replaced. But her favorite nights by far were with Asami. Sometimes she arrived while pretending to check on her warehouse, with food that just so happened to be in her bag. Sometimes they walked the streets in the twilight of the sunset. Once Asami dropped any pretense altogether and brought Korra back to her home, a rather palatial estate with enough people to cook the richest meal she had ever tasted. She had even insisted on showing Korra her bedroom, which made Korra lose her nerve and duck out ungracefully. They had stayed on the boat after that, passing drinks back and forth while they sat under the stars, shuffling closer until they passed out or called it a night. The bellow of the ferry's horn broke Korra out of her reverie as it approached Air Temple Island. She had decided to take the ferry at least once, and after only a few minutes she decided to never take it again if at all possible. It was loud, smelled of sweat, and someone had tried walking off with her backpack. More than once the temptation arose to shear off parts of the hull and let it sink, but she held back, and she disembarked not a moment too soon. Air Temple Island was even quieter than usual. Korra adjusted a strap on her backpack and started up the stairs, where a few acolytes were sweeping the steps. They nodded to her as she passed, and in the courtyard she saw Jinora at the Bagua circle, trying once more to airbend. Tenzin stood nearby, watching her in one of his finer cloaks. "Good morning," Korra said. Jinora ignored her, lost in concentration, and Tenzin pursed his lips as he watched her. "Hello, Korra. I wasn't able to get a message to you, I have a meeting to attend. There won't be much to observe today, unless you have a section on cleaning in your paper." "Council business?" she asked, bristling. "Yes, we have a few matters to go over. My usual page who goes to these things with me is sick, though. I was going to ask Jinora, but she barely moves from the Bagua circle. Is that something I could do?" Tenzin raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure the note-taking part of it wouldn't faze you, but it's hardly something to add to your research." "Oh, no, it's more of a personal thing. I've always been interested in governments." She rolled back and forth on her heels while Tenzin considered it. Plying him never proved to be a challenge. "That should be fine. Let's head out, then." He said goodbye to Jinora, who stayed ignorant of the world outside the Bagua circle. Korra felt her heart pound in her chest. Is it really going to be this easy, she thought. They returned to the dock and took one of the boats, heading back to the city at a leisurely pace to weave through the water traffic. "Thank you for helping me out with this, Korra," Tenzin said, letting the boat idle while a cargo ship passed them. She shrugged. "Don't mention it. What's your meeting about?" "We met with some Earth Kingdom officials a few weeks ago who had sent teams to look for the next avatar. It went as well as all the other searches. Now we have to decide if we want to send our own people out. A few groups from one province can't cover the entire Earth Kingdom, and it's been almost 20 years now." Korra leaned over the side of the boat, letting her fingers skim through the water as they moved. "Hopefully this one didn't kill their parents, too." "No, the last avatar's parents are still alive. It was only her that died in that fire. Tonrik and Senna were both fine." "What?" She spun back so fast the boat shook. Korra clambered over one row of seats, looking desperately at Tenzin. "What do you mean? Aren't you from the South Pole? How is it you don't know any of this?" I haven't been there in years. I grew up in the Fire Nation." "Jinora mentioned you were a firebender." Tenzin looked around her to keep the boat on course. "I spoke with Tonrik not 2 weeks ago about establishing a consulate there. He's still very much alive, still the chief of the Southern Water Tribe." With a retch in her stomach, Korra leaned over the side of the boat again and heaved. Her throat burned and her legs shook madly at his words. With her arms still trembling, she pushed herself back into her seat, breathing heavily and holding her head in her hands. "Are you okay?" "No." "Fine," Korra said, fingers gripping at her hair. Once her head stopped spinning, she began to process his words, dancing around memories of contrary facts she had been told for years. Her father was a leader. Her father was alive. Korra was only vaguely aware of following Tenzin through the city after he docked the boat, moving as if in the haze of a waking dream. There was a sound that might have been him speaking, but it was all a dull echo to her. She only focused on following the maroon of Tenzin's cloak from a few steps behind, flicking her fingers together to create sparks as she did. If her parents were alive, then the fire she started hadn't killed anyone. "Did I start that fire?" "Yes," she told herself. She knew she could firebend by then. It must have been her. "Tenzin." He turned back as they stood waiting at a crosswalk. "Yes." "Chief Tonrik, what's he like?" "A great man, and a better chief. His father ruled both tribes until they separated about 30 years ago. He lives near my mother, and I try to see him whenever I go to visit her. Amazingly devoted to his people, although, to tell you the truth, he and Senna were never the same after their daughter died." Tenzin paused while they crossed the street, and then continued as they neared City Hall. "Not that I can blame them, I can't imagine losing a child. I still remember the funeral. The whole tribe was silent through the entire procession, and Tonrik and Senna were inconsolable for a week." "Did they have any other children?" Korra asked, her voice sullen. "No, they never did. I'm not sure if they could handle it." She was their only child. Even not living there, I'm very surprised you don't know any of this. The death of an avatar isn't exactly a provincial event. I never followed the news growing up. Her hands tightened into fists, then relaxed. Everything was kind of sheltered. We're here. City Hall loomed before them, gold trim standing in relief against brilliant white travertine and capped with a massive green dome. It looked rather nice in the daytime, Cora had to admit. So we are. Are you sure you're okay? You look ready to pass out. I can do this myself, if need be. No, I'm all right. Something I ate. Let's go. She had managed to approach the front of the building a few times at night, but never got inside before. A guard waved her and Tenzin through the main doors and into the rotunda. The outside was impressive, the inside was another order of magnitude entirely. On the inside of the dome was a massive fresco map of the world, stylized to present each nation vibrantly in their home colors. Statues stood sentry along the walls, past avatars and counselors, and in the middle of the rotunda was a large monument to the four elements. Hidden spouts kept a flame burning and waterfall flowing beneath it, while wind chimes above tinkled and earth and metal wrapped around it all. It's this way, Tenzin said, sidestepping the display and heading to another set of doors opposite the main entrance. Cora followed with a glance back at the monument. Your chair will be next to mine, beside the table. I'll trust you to capture the salient points, but I don't think this will take long. Sounds good. Thank you again, Cora, he said, almost hanging on her name while he opened the door to the council chamber. I really appreciate it. Cora looked at him warily, but they exchanged no more words, and made their way inside. The chamber's opulence was slightly more understated than the rotunda, but the extravagance was still plain to see. 3 people she didn't know were already assembled, as well as one she did. Bolin sat to the right of the center seat, rolling a small smooth stone through his fingers that he set down as they approached. Hello again, he said, ignoring Tenzin entirely as he took the seat on Bolin's left. The hairs on the back of Cora's neck stood up. Counselor. Tenzin motioned to Cora as she took a chair from the gallery and put it at one end of the table. This is Cora, she'll be paging for us today. She's the one doing the research you keep going on about, the woman in the center seat asked. Cora blushed as she retrieved her notebook. Yes, Izuna. Shall we get started? They called roll a rather excessive point of order if anyone asked Cora, but no one asked her and launched into their discussion. Her hand carried the pen across her notebook automatically, gliding along with their voices while her eyes flitted around the room. It was a closed meeting, leaving the 6 of them behind a locked door. All Cora could see was one large death trap. The floor and table were both stone, something she could easily melt and leave them all awash in lava. A few pillars flanking them looked like they could be pulled down quickly, and failing all that the chandeliers above them were metal. Bending gold was challenging, but not beyond her. But for all the opportunities the room provided Cora, her mind was in another place entirely. Her parents were alive. Tenzin had no reason to deceive her and sometimes seemed honest to a fault. All the guilt and hatred she spent years turning inward was baseless, then, and a lie. Why would they lie to me? Cora tried to shake her head clear and looked at the counselors. Their meeting had devolved into an argument teetering on the edge of civility, and her notes had similarly become little more than a wavering line across the page. This should be a matter for the White Lotus, Bolin was saying, leaning forward and putting his hand on his forehead. What's the alternative? Sending the United Forces into the Earth Kingdom? We can't tie them up as an expeditionary force. You heard how the teams from Jinsha spent 6 months scouring a single corner of the country without results. Not to mention the reaction from the rest of the world if we sent our domestic force across the border. The world needs its avatar, Tenzin replied simply. The White Lotus has gone 20 years without results. And I think we have a slightly larger force than a single province in the Southern Earth Kingdom. You might not have the most unbiased perspective here, Tenzin, Izuna said. He shifted in his seat. I think you're letting your relationship with the Avatar affect your impartiality. Her comment set the argument onto the other side of civility, and Cora leaned back in her chair while their voices raised. She looked at the clock and saw that nearly an hour had passed without any sort of progress. These people aren't evil. Incompetent, not evil. They're too busy fighting each other to be any threat. Bolin pounding his gavel on the table silenced everyone. I think we've passed the point of productivity. Let's table this for now and move up our talks with the provincial governors. Who knows? This land used to be part of the Earth Kingdom. It still is, if you ask the Earth Kingdom, isn't a cut-in. Maybe the Avatar is right here. Bolin's eyes fixed on Korra, who impassively matched his gaze, hands set in her lap. In the United Republic, that is. Everyone else grumbled their assent, and Bolin brought the gavel down once more. That's a full lid, then. See you all tomorrow. Maybe leave the tempers at the door. Korra could feel Bolin's eyes burning a hole in the back of her head as she ducked down to pack her notebook. The other counselors filtered out one by one, until only her, Tenzin, and Bolin remained. Isn't had a point, you know, Bolin said. Tenzin huffed, and instead of pressing the subject Bolin turned his attention to their page. How was your first foray into the glamorous world of Republic City politics, miss? It's just Korra. And this wasn't exactly what I expected. Mostly because you were too busy arguing to actually get anything done. More exciting than budget votes. I have a family function, so I have to run. Tenzin. Korra. It was a bright, hot, dry day, and Mako had committed to enjoying as much of it as he could. There was the weekly dinner with their family later, but until then the plaza in front of City Hall was a fine place to spend his afternoon. Sitting in a heavily trafficked area wasn't a terrible alibi, either, even if his memories of the place were mixed. His hand brushed against a worn-down carving on a slat of his bench, and he had to smile despite himself. Asami's initials were crudely intertwined with his, faded by the years almost to the point of being unnoticeable. You shouldn't live in the past. He looked up, squinting slightly from turning his gaze directly into the sun, and saw Asami standing there, arms crossed over her chest. I don't know, the past is awfully nice. Especially before we started hating each other. What are you doing here? Stopping by the permit office. You. Waiting for Bolin. Family thing. Care to join me? Mako asked, leaning back on the bench. To his surprise, Asami shrugged and sat next to him. Didn't expect that to work. You're surprisingly tolerable when you aren't stealing from me. Before we started hating each other, we could go about 7 years back to when we were 18 and you brought me here. After you finally worked up the nerve to ask me out on a proper date. You only ever seemed interested in a physical relationship, Mako said. If you had ever mentioned romance I would have asked sooner. And Bolin was paging for the council then, so you convinced him to set up that light show while we walked through the plaza. Asami finally seemed to relax, letting the memory flood in. One of my better dates, even if it was with you. You're a shoo-in for backhanded compliment of the year. Then we sat here to watch the rest, and you pulled a knife. To carve our initials in the bench. Mako said indignantly, pointing to the remains of the etching between them. Yes, but you learned to mention things like that beforehand instead of trying to do it without a word, didn't you? Mako curled his hand into a fist and then flattened it again. Yeah. It still hurts when it rains. Sprained wrist aside, it was a pretty good date. It's not like we ever needed weapons to hurt each other, anyway. I thought you wanted to stay in the nice memories, she said, giving him a sidelong glance before turning to look straight at him. We've beaten each other up too many times to reminisce about in a single afternoon. Fair enough. Do you ever wonder how it might have been different? Asami asked. If you weren't a bender, things like that? I do. So much for not living in the past. I think about it sometimes, but even if I'd lost my bending I think you'd still hate me. Besides, I thought you were keeping busy with that Water Tribe girl. Korra, she said, a grin creeping unbidden across her lips. Yeah, her. I don't know how you ever got the Avatar to sign on with you, but your recruiting is second to none. For a moment she could find nothing to say, only looking blankly at her ex. What did you say? The what? That's Avatar Korra. She shot up from the bench, glaring at Mako. No it isn't. Oh, then it must be some other airbending, firebending Water Tribe girl named Korra, he said, matching her motion, so they were both standing, staring daggers at one another. The softness they had let surface disappeared in an instant, buried under fresh animosity. She made me say as much after she tossed us all around with a cyclone, and she sure isn't one of Tenzin's kids. Their shouting was beginning to draw the attention of some of the guards posted in front of City Hall, but neither of them noticed. "You're a damn liar," Asami spat, her hand cracking across Mako's face. "Are your meetings always this productive?" Korra asked as she and Tenzin left the council chamber. "No. Sometimes we have lunch delivered and manage to get even less done. That Bolin guy is a jerk." Korra thought she saw a smile flash on Tenzin's face for a brief moment. "I'm not inclined to disagree with you there. Privately, of course. So that's kind of your pet project, huh?" Finding the Avatar again. Tenzin led them back through the rotunda and to the main entrance. "There isn't anyone better to help restore balance to Republic City. We're going to have a war on our doorstep now that the Equalists have resurfaced and they're going for the Triads, and we need all the help we can get." As they stepped outside, the sun kissed Korra's skin, and she very nearly bumped into Bolin on the steps, rooted in place by something. "I thought you had a family function," Korra said. "Some of my family is busy making a very big mistake." She looked to where Bolin indicated, near the foot of the City Hall stairs, and felt her chest tighten. Asami and Mako were at each other's throats, and they were close enough that their argument was plainly audible to Korra and the counselors watching. "You're a damn liar," Asami said with a hard slap to Mako's cheek. The strike barely seemed to faze Mako, and his only reaction was to turn his head to where Korra, Bolin, and Tenzin stood. His eyes narrowed. "Oh no. No, no, no. Think so?" he asked, turning back to Asami. He took a step to close the distance between them, staring her down. Sparks crackled around his hand in a flurry of light. "Ask her. Leave her alone." Korra wasn't aware of moving to react. They were drilled motions, far below the level of conscious thought, and no sooner had the air rushed out under her command than she realized what she had done. Mako flew right off his feet and into the air, coming down hard in a topiary on the edge of the plaza. No one seemed terribly concerned with his landing, and instead everyone's focus snapped to Korra, who had not thought to move out of her airbending form. "Did you just airbend?" Tenzin asked, sputtering for the words. "Seems Mako was right," Bolin said, backing away from her. "You are the Avatar." Asami only looked at her, dumbstruck, her eyes betraying so much anguish that Korra couldn't bear to meet her gaze. "Korra." The guards began descending on her and Mako. The stone beneath Korra's feet shot out of place and propelled her upward, and once in the air fire burst from her feet, rocketing her away. Chapter 9, The Ultimatum. The booking process was intimately familiar to Mako. An officer hauled him through the station, making a special detour to parade him in front of the organized crime unit. He let them have their fun, and endured it all with a proper look of indignation. When they were through jeering, the officer dragged him back down to intake, where they took his fingerprints in a fresh mugshot. Every so often he looked over at the far side of the area, where the women were handled. Bafong was processing Asami personally, and the occasional glare she shot him stung deeper than any rough handling from the officers. "I think I actually saw the chief smile when she ran you two in," Captain Saiken said as he led Mako down a hallway full of holding cells. "Glad I could brighten her day." Saiken picked a cell and shoved Mako inside, where he nearly tripped over the frame of the cot. He began closing the door, but a voice stopped him short. "Hold up." He paused, and stood guard over Mako instead while Lin led Asami into the next cell over. The captain stood aside while Lin closed Asami's door and returned to Mako's. She gave him a hard look, and for an instant he thought he saw it waver into something else, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "You don't know how long I've waited for this." Lin brought her arms from one side to the other, and the heavy metal cell door slammed into place in its frame. She twirled her fingers in a circle, and the handcuffs released from Mako's wrists and floated back to her through the bars of the door. "Was that as good for you as it was for me?" Mako asked dryly, rubbing his wrists while he sat back on the hard cot. He looked around the cell. There was a stone seat in front of a slab that served as a desk, and a metal toilet with a sink on top. They had upgraded since the last time he had been processed. Grey stone walls and a door were the extent of his world again. Lin pursed her lips, trying not to smile. Better. I knew I'd satisfy you eventually. She was in too good a mood to rise to his taunt. Instead she and Saiken simply walked away, leaving Mako with nothing but a view of a section of stone wall and the muffled sounds of Asami crying. It twisted at his heartstrings, but the instinct to comfort her faded quickly. Pull it together, he muttered. The sniffling paused for a moment. It's your fault we're in here anyway. I don't even know why I'm in here, as a matter of fact. You're the one who slapped me. That menacing charge will never hold up. She lied to me. Asami's voice was low, and he struggled to hear her. Something that sounded suspiciously like a fist pounding a pillow accompanied her voice. You can't honestly tell me you didn't know you were going around with the Avatar. It's not like they have big identifying tattoos or something, Asami shot back, her voice tinged with anger. Well, the last one. Oh, shut up. Mako rolled his eyes and looked up at the ceiling. More grey stone, and a light buzzing faintly in the center. So you really didn't know? I really didn't know. She never bent anything in front of me before today, Asami said, the anger in her voice replaced by defeat. She tends to beat me up whenever I'm near you. Is there a bell around your neck that brings her running? Or is that just the effect you have on her? I didn't even know you liked girls before this little escapade. Puts our breakup in some new perspective, doesn't it? I'm done talking. Come on, he said, rapping his knuckles on the wall between them. No response. You have something better to do in there? Lin give you a deck of cards or something? I told you I was impressed, I thought you still liked having your ego stroked. The Equalist and the Avatar, now how's that for a story? It'd sweep every mover award they have. Asami's boot slammed into the frame of her cot, and the metal rattled. I swear, I'm going to break your jaw when I get out of here. He declined to think up a retort. Some hours later, footsteps down the hall drew his attention. Slowly, painfully slowly, Bolin stepped into view, giving him the same glare as Lin from across the intake area. It didn't have quite the same effect coming from him, and Mako shot up off the bed. I like the new mugshot, Bolin said. The old one had that awful beard you tried growing. Took you long enough. Remember what I said about liabilities and not becoming one, Mako? You're becoming one. Bolin glanced into the next cell. Asami. Counselor. Venom dripped from the word. Here to ride in and save the day for him? Honor among thieves, I guess. Bold words from behind a cell door. I'm sure you'll be out of here in no time, anyway. Bolin turned his attention back to his brother. You did this on purpose to get out of dinner with everyone tonight, didn't you? Mako raised his hands in mock surrender. Yeah, you caught me. Sitting here in this cell is obviously preferable to a slightly boring family meal and ducking around questions, so I went and got myself arrested. I even dragged Asami along for the fun of it. She had a board meeting she wanted to skip. Now are you going to get me out or not? I really shouldn't, Bolin said, crossing his arms. I ought to leave you in here until they arraign you and make some excuse to Grandma about you being sick. But having you here puts a massive target on this building for every 2-bit triad who wants to make a name for himself, same with Asami and her people. You have a knack for wrangling them. In your own twisted way, you've got them propped up as some kind of family, they listen to you. And frankly I'd rather have them fighting Equalists than the police. Asami scoffed. I guess there's something in there about how you're my brother, no matter how monumentally you screw up, and I'm grateful to you for letting me know the Avatar was running around my city. How was I the last one to know about this? Asami asked. They ignored her. Well, I guess we're even, then, Mako began, but Bolin was already shaking his head. Not even close. First, you're going to dinner. I'm not. Tenzin is already chomping at the bit trying to find this girl. You're going to sit there, smile, explain I've got urgent council business, and say absolutely nothing about the last 3 hours. Second, you're going to calm down your triads. I'm not their father, despite what you might think. Once they know I ended up in here with Asami, I won't be able to stop them if they want to hunt down Equalists. Not that I'd want to, either. You'll do what you can. I'm not going to have blood running through the streets. And you still owe me, big time. It was hardly a choice. Done. Bolin produced a cell key from his jacket pocket and unlocked the door, letting it slide back on its rail. Mako stepped slowly out and peered into Asami's cell where she sat on her cot, sulking. They locked eyes, and for a moment they were 18 again, seething after one fight or another before they would kiss and make up. He said nothing and followed Bolin back down the hall. Oh, and one more thing. You're going to cool it with Bafong. Was that her condition for letting me out? Mako asked. No, it's my condition. She can make my life miserable when she's on a tear, which she usually is after one of your come-ons. Postmenopausal police chief getting riled up? You have no idea how unpleasant she can be after talking to you. Bolin knocked on the door at the end of the hall and it slid open, bringing them back to the main processing area. Plus it's just weird. Even ignoring the fact that she's old enough to be our mother, she took us in. Or tried to, anyway. What's the matter with you? I wouldn't expect you to understand. Don't worry, I don't. I prefer women my own age, thanks very much. Bolin led him to the quieter, secondary exit, where they could leave without attracting attention, but they were too late for that. Lin leaned against the wall beside the door, staring them both down. Don't make me regret this, counselor, she said, her voice as sharp as steel. He nodded to her as he returned the cell key, and Mako passed with only a quick glance, remaining silent until they were in the parking lot behind the building. Happy. Over the moon. Go to dinner and make nice with everyone. Oh, and Mako. Bolin wheeled around and grabbed Mako by the collar, pulling him down with surprising ease until they were at eye level with one another. They're going to rip into me over letting you out. You might not be afraid of Bafong, but don't make me regret this. The city's on the brink of falling apart and this is what you want to focus on. Tenzin clenched his jaw at Sonny's question. We can't make the police work any harder than they already are. They've called in everyone they can while they coordinate with the United Forces. So we are authorizing military action. Kula asked, steepling her fingers. Equalists and triads aren't an invasion force. The backlash will be incredible, and I can already tell you that the rest of the world won't hesitate to haul us in front of a tribunal over it. We can't authorize anything, Izuna said. Not until Bolin gets back. Mobilizing the United Forces has to be a unanimous decision. Where did he go? He said something about police headquarters. Tenzin sat back in his seat, lightly touching a pounding vein in his forehead. And Izuna is right. There's no point in debating this until Bolin is here. So yes, Sonny, I want to focus on finding the Avatar before we have to decide if we're going to turn our army on our own people. And you're sure that girl was the Avatar? Sonny asked. It defies credibility. She was paging a meeting about herself? Not to mention that you didn't notice her in all that time she was on your island. She was airbending, and then she started earthbending and firebending. Bolin saw it too. I didn't even know she could bend at all until a few weeks ago, and then I thought she was only a firebender. A water tribe firebender? Kula asked. We know there were lots of firebending children popping up in the Earth Kingdom during and after the war, but that didn't happen in the water tribes. You can all feel free to look at this with perfect hindsight, or we can do something about it, Tenzin said. Internally he was beating himself over the head, but there was nothing to be done about the past. I asked some of our people to look at where she was staying, but we should at least work with the White Lotus if the police haven't already commandeered them. Izuna frowned. Our branch of the White Lotus is maybe 20 people, and the main force is still garrisoned in Omashu. It would take them at least a week to get here, and by then the Avatar could be anywhere. We can order tighter border patrols, but she's been here for over a month. My guess is she's still in the city. You'll understand if your intuition is suspect at the moment, Sonny said coolly. Tenzin began to protest, but the main door opened and Mei stumbled in, sporting a black eye. The police armor she had taken instead of the usual government uniform was badly dinged, and one of the sleeves was on the verge of falling off entirely. She had a backpack in her hand, badly torn and frayed. Mei? What happened? Izuna asked, standing up so fast she nearly knocked her chair down. I'm fine, Mom. Counselor, sorry. Counselor Tenzin asked us to check a boat by the southern docks. Izuna stared daggers at him, and Tenzin was glad that looks couldn't kill. I didn't want the trail to go cold, he mumbled. Who attacked you? Equalists? Triads. The Avatar, she said. We kept to the back roads to avoid the fighting, and the docks looked clear when we arrived. No one was on the boat, so we went into the hold. There wasn't much of anything inside. A few candles in a bedroll. It was like a monk lived there. And the backpack? Sonny asked. I thought she had it with her when she was here earlier. She showed up, Counselor. We were busy searching and didn't hear the footsteps. She seemed more scared than angry, honestly. I don't think she knew we were firebenders at first, because she kept from actually bending, May said, wincing and holding her hand to the bruise under her eye. She was so fast, Ayane and Rico went down in less than a minute. Then Chan threw some fire with a punch, and she cut loose. She made the whole boat ripple. I don't know how else I could describe it. The metal almost erupted and then tossed us around with a kind of cyclone. We don't have any countermeasures for something like that. It threw us totally off balance. More air bending, Tenzin said. I got off a good fire blast before I hit my head. Singed her jacket. Chan managed to get to his feet and start with his lightning, so she made the boat ripple again and escaped. She dropped her bag, though. May got herself slowly to the council table, limping through some unseen damage under her uniform, and opened up the backpack's main compartment. A change of clothes, a few pencils, an old poetry book, she said, holding up each in turn. And under those, we found a few more damning things. This odd kind of armor. It's got water skins and metal strips, the kind the police shear off to make restraints. Not something anyone but the Avatar could use. She showed it to them. It looked to be a fabric weave, stained a dark red, and May set it down to root through the bag again. This, too. Council information. Looks like minutes from a meeting. A notebook appeared from the bag. Yes, she was paging for us, earlier, Tenzin said. Look in the back. She placed it in the center of the table, in front of Izuna, and they crowded around her as she flipped through the pages. Nothing stood out near the beginning, mostly sketches of parts of Air Temple Island and transcriptions of meditation chants for the acolytes. There were a few drawings of airbending forms, a Bagua circle, and some of the outfits the acolytes wore. Is any of this bad? Kula asked Tenzin. No, but it's remarkably detailed. She told me she researched air nomads at her university. The last 2 pages are what stuck out to me, counselors. Izuna flipped through the remainder of the content and dozens of empty pages to the end, where there was a crude map of the city hall exterior, with all the possible exits marked out. The ink of the map looked to be at least weeks old, but it was crossed out with fresh, thick lines. Sonny's hand drifted over the map. Looks like she copied an architectural plan. Why cross it out? May turned the last page. Mom is alive. Dad is alive. Red Lotus liars. It was written over and over again, filling the entire page in an increasingly violent scrawl until it descended into illegibility. On the inside of the back cover was a stylized lotus, drawn in faded red ink, and it too was crossed out with new black lines. None of them knew quite how to react. Izuna traced her fingers over the words, Kula sat back down, and Tenzin felt his heart sink as Sonny turned to him. What is all this? He asked. What's this red lotus she keeps referring to? Tenzin's voice was low and concerned. I have no idea. We were talking about the last Avatar's parents, her parents, rather on the way over here this morning. She thought they were killed in a fire years ago. I told her how they were alive, and she looked like she was about to be sick. She said it was indigestion. I didn't quite believe her, but I thought she might have been having her period and didn't want to say so. Everyone else looked at him, and Tenzin huffed. I have 2 teenage daughters. I know better than to ask that question. Sonny ran his hand through his hair, reaching back almost to the braids over his neck. I'm sorry I doubted you, Tenzin. So, we have a panicked and possibly emotionally compromised Avatar somewhere in Republic City. Maybe we should mobilize the United Forces, Kula said. Izuna turned to her daughter. May, where are the others who went with you? Chan and I brought Ayane and Riko to the nearest hospital, and he stayed there with them. I know I look bad, but it's mostly superficial. This armor is some amazing stuff. Go to a doctor. And tell whoever's on shift to find Bolin. She nodded as the phone rang, and she went automatically to answer it. Captain Kimura, thank you, I'll tell them. May dropped the phone onto its hook. Asami Sato's lawyer sprung her. The counselor did the same for his brother. Tenzin held his head in his hands. So much for keeping the situation contained. Asami ducked into the back of the waiting car while Fu climbed into the driver's seat. The back parking lot of the police station was devoid of press, thanks to the much nicer car ostensibly waiting for her at the front of the building. That battery charge was never going to stick, he said as they pulled out onto the street. Sure enough, all the reporters and photographers were out in front of her usual car and ignoring the small sedan spiriting her away. Bafang only wanted something to run you in on. She said nothing as she watched the early evening traffic go by. There had been more than enough time in her cell to exhaust that line of thought, and it was over and done with as far as she was concerned. Bafang wanted a media circus, wanted to humiliate her. She didn't care that Asami had slapped Mako. She probably wanted to buy me a drink for it, she thought. What happened while I was in there? Asami asked. There was some fighting downtown with a bunch of triads. 7 people in the hospital, 5 of theirs, 2 of ours. The rest of us were shoring up some of our safe houses. Everyone's out for blood. More than they were before, anyway. And Cora. He paused to search for the right word. Friend. I haven't seen her. She hasn't tried to get in touch with us, as far as I know. Why? She was there, at City Hall. Asami took a deep breath, fighting to keep her voice steady. She's the Avatar. Fu slammed on the brakes, causing a cascade of angry car horns behind them. He ignored the noise and whipped around in his seat. What? Just what I said, she's the Avatar. You're holding up the traffic. He righted himself and put the car back in gear. I didn't know until today when she took Mako off his feet with some airbending. Can't believe the police are managing to keep such a tight lid on it. They're too busy trying to keep us and the triads apart to do much else. Fu let his head fall back onto his headrest. That girl saved our lives, and she's some bender. I need some time to think, Asami said, leaning against the window. Take me home. She closed her eyes and huddled her knees up under her chin. Out of the cell and having worked through the absurdity of her arrest, there was finally time and clarity to assess the bigger issue. Cora was the Avatar and that information was going to get out, one way or another. She trusted Fu to say nothing. His loyalty was beyond question, if only because it would throw the Equalists into disarray if they knew their leader was, whatever she was with the Avatar. But it would get out, she knew. Maybe not soon, and maybe not with all the details of their relationship, but it would get out that Cora was the Avatar. The police knew, the council knew, and Mako knew. Her hands tightened into fists at the thought that Mako knew more about Cora than she did. I'm going to kill him, she muttered, digging her nails into her palms so hard she was afraid she would draw blood. Traffic was light once they got into Asami's neighborhood, and once they pulled up in front of her house she hopped out of the back seat without preamble. She went up to the driver's door and Fu rolled down the window for her. Find the Avatar, she said, her voice raw from trying not to cry all the way home. Take some people and find her. She was staying on a little boat in front of our warehouse on the docks. Start there. What do we do when we find her, he asked. I don't know yet. The car eased away and disappeared while Asami looked up at the mid-sunset sky. It was going to rain soon. She went into her quiet, darkened house, slumped into a chair in the foyer, and let herself cry. She cried so hard and for so long that it began to hurt. Her throat felt hot and strangled, her eyes stung from the tears, and her body was growing sore from the shaking. Something fell in one of the rooms above her, and Asami's ears pricked up. None of her staff were there, and the door had been locked when she came in. Asami flicked her hand over the bank of switches beside the door, bathing the entry hall and surrounding rooms in light. Hello. There came no reply, and Asami got up out of her chair, eyes narrowing while she stalked up the staircase. She took a poker from in front of one of the hallway fireplaces and tried to trace the noise. As near as she could tell, it came from the room directly over the entrance, the only one with its door closed. Her bedroom. Her boot crashed into the door at the spot she knew was weak, sending it flying on its hinge. It slammed into the wall, revealing her room much like she remembered leaving it that morning. Her desk was covered with diagrams in a disassembled shock glove, a small black wallet sat on her dresser, and the picture of her with her parents still hung on the far wall. The only things different, in fact, were the slightly open window and the bleary-eyed woman sitting on her bed. "Please don't hate me," Cora said. Asami felt the gorge rise in her throat, and she remembered the poker in her hand. She took 2 large steps into the room and thrust it at her, but Cora raised her arm and the metal bent away, curling uselessly back toward itself. Cora scrambled off the bed and backed away while Asami advanced on her, shaking so badly that she dropped the poker. "Asami, please." She took a wild swing on Cora, too obviously telegraphed to have a chance of connecting, and Cora dipped down, tears shining in her eyes. "Damn you! Damn you!" Cora stopped, a forlorn expression growing on her face, and made no effort to move out of the path of the next punch, or the third or fourth. She only stood there, taking the hits without even a grunt of pain. Asami struck her arms, her shoulders, her stomach, the side of her head. There was no finesse behind it, no jabs to pressure points. Only anger that slowly siphoned into her, welling up so fast in her chest she thought she would explode. They were both crying, and Asami's angry outbursts devolved into incoherence as she fell back onto her bed. Cora knelt down in front of her and sat seiza, her palms turned up on her knees in supplication. "Why did it have to be you?" Asami asked, nearly choking on the words. "I thought something similar when I found out you were an equalist." Cora laughed bitterly, her gaze slipping away from Asami. "And then again when I found out you were their leader. I wish I could go back to this afternoon and not stop to talk to Mako. There was a little noodle stand I wanted to take you to." "I didn't want this," Cora said, turning back to look at her. "I didn't ask to be the Avatar. I didn't ask to have people lying to me for years and making me feel bad about the things the past Avatars did. I didn't ask to believe I had killed my parents for 20 years. I didn't ask to get feelings for you and hate myself for starting to like the people I came here to kill." She spoke so fast that Asami barely understood her, but her head spun from the parts she caught. Cora had set her jaw in a hard line to keep her composure, but tears were still trickling down her face. "What are you talking about?" Asami asked. "The Council, the police, the Triads, the United Forces commanders. I settled on the Equalist leaders too, if the opportunity presented itself. I came here to kill all of you. They told me all of you had to die so I could fix the last Avatar's mistake." "What mistake?" Cora held her arms out, as if to indicate everything around her. "This. The United Republic. Another nation and set of borders to prop up leaders and tread all over the rest of the people." She took a deep breath. "At least, that's what I was told. The Council's a bunch of arguing children and you're not a monster. You're just a regular person. I'm the monster. For trying to kill us? People that are trying to fight back against the Triads that use their bending to terrorize others? Why do you think we hate benders? For lying to you and Tenzin and everyone else. For letting people lie to me my whole life. For planning to kill the people in charge and plunge everything into chaos. Do you feel like a hero yet, Avatar?" Cora winced, but didn't answer her. "And for this?" She reached down to her boot and produced a knife, its handle intricately carved out of what looked like whalebone. Cora slid the blade across her palm and held it up for Asami to see. A streak of red marred her skin, and after a moment it twisted upward, forming a spiral before falling flat and disappearing back into her hand. Asami could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The adrenaline surged, and she heard her own rapid, ragged breathing overtake every other sound around them. A sickly cold sweat kicked in, and her hands began to shake. "You're a bloodbender." Cora looked at her almost apologetically, but Asami pushed herself to the far side of her bed and backed into the wall, fresh tears and hysterics overtaking her. With a quick, hot breath to cauterize the cut. Cora stood up, looking at Asami and stepping around her bed. There's a full moon tonight. I don't use it. I've never used it on people and I hope I never need to. I've had it done to me and it's awful. She started toward the spot Asami had backed into. Don't you come near me. She struggled to stay in the present moment, wavering from side to side. Her mind tried to slip back to finding her father's body, to discovering the truth of his death, to killing the last bloodbender she found. I lost everything today, Cora said softly as her shoulders slumped. I found out the people I thought were my family lied to me about everything for decades. Whatever rationale I had for the ideology I've been taught my whole life fell apart. The police are hunting me. You were the first person who was ever nice to me without wanting anything back, without lying to me, and now anything you felt for me is gone, too. Asami looked at her, searching for the words she wanted and failing to find them. Cora was wrong, she knew. On some level it was still there, tamped down under fear and apprehension and worry with a dozen other feelings she couldn't describe. Cora chanced another step toward her, and she matched it, going back and forth until they were in arm's reach of each other. She must have taken too long to reply, because any hope that still flickered in Cora's eyes faded. I don't have anything left. Cora flipped the knife around and pressed the hilt into Asami's hand. She put her hands on her head and closed her eyes, fighting back what was left of her tears. If you hate me so much, then kill me. Chapter 10, In Harm's Way. I hope the next avatar is better than me. Cora waited, her eyes shut tight, agonizing over where Asami would sink the knife into her. Tears flowed despite her efforts to hold them back, rolling down and falling from her chin. She didn't know so much crying was possible. Her hands trembled on her head, and any strength left in her legs threatened to fail at any moment. The smell of her own fear, the hot metallic stench of blood mingled with sweat and adrenaline, overpowered the light perfume hanging in the air. That bothered her more than anything. If she was going to die, she wanted Asami's scent to surround her, not her own broken cowardice. But she wanted several things she wasn't going to have. She wanted soft, delicate hands holding her tight, gripping, exploring. She wanted whispers against her ear telling her she wasn't a monster, that she didn't need to hate herself, that it was all going to be okay. She wanted to hug her parents and tell them she was sorry. She wanted Asami's lipstick on her cheeks, her neck, her lips. She wanted several things. All she was getting was a blade. With a strangled cry, she tried relaxing her muscles so that it would be over quicker, but the bite of the knife didn't come. It was just as well, everything was tight and contracted from the adrenaline flowing through her veins. Her legs shook, and through the vibrations she saw that Asami hadn't moved. She only stood there, turning the knife over in her hand. Why are you drawing this out? Cora asked, sniffling and resisting the urge to open her eyes. Her breathing quickened, turning into short, pained gasps in time with the racing of her heart. Haven't I been through enough today? Just get it over with. Do it. Cora heard the swish of Asami's clothes as she wound back, and as she resisted every instinct to move away or defend herself, metal clattered onto wood. She cracked one eye and saw the knife sliding away on the floor before it hit the leg of a chair and fell still. Her heart still beat madly, pounding in her chest. Why? Asami cut her off with a quick step forward. She took Cora's head in her hands and crashed their lips together, leaving shock and relief in equal measure. The gloss in Asami's lipstick smudged and stuck around her mouth, covering the lines her tears had made. Her hands fell away from her head and found Asami's hair, tangling up in the soft, sleek waves. Their selves melted away, there was no equalist, and no avatar. Only two desperate, damaged people. With a quick push, Cora found herself on the soft silk sheets of the bed, staring up at Asami crawling onto her. The adrenaline was still coursing, and she was hyper-aware of the hands tracing up under her jacket, drifting along the scars covering her body. Don't you ever bloodbend again, Asami said in barely more than a dangerous whisper, their faces so close that the tips of their noses bumped into one another. One of her fingers brushed at the wraps on Cora's chest, and she nodded obediently, breaking out into a tearful grin as she did. Never. She was nearly breathless, too excited and too relieved to draw air. Asami. Another kiss, softer and slower, silenced her. Cora's body twisted and shivered under Asami's touch, moving to try and guide her fingers away from any scar tissue, but she was too caught up to care much. Instead she explored Asami, hands sliding from her hips to the small of her back, greedily clutching and groping along the way. Asami nibbled at Cora's lower lip, and the head rush almost made her hips buck. Fire and sweet, aching pressure built up between her legs, and a new tingling coursed through her wherever Asami laid her hands or lips. She moaned, consumed by sensation, and Asami sat up so that she was straddling Cora around her hips. With one deft motion, Asami unfastened the button on her jacket and opened it, leaving her maroon turtleneck bare while she stripped off the jacket and threw it across the room. Cora watched, entranced, and squeezed Asami's thighs while she pulled the sweater over her head. The intricate black lace of her bra stood in sharp contrast to her skin, and Cora slid one hand over Asami's stomach while she reached for the clips of her bra. She was softer than Cora, with curves and smoothness rather than sharply defined muscle and scarring, and Cora felt a rush of self-consciousness at the comparison. "You're so beautiful," Cora murmured as Asami undid her bra and tossed it aside. Her breasts were full and slightly paler than the skin around them, dotted with small pink nipples. She took Cora's hands and put them on her chest, biting her lip when Cora felt her warmth and squeezed lightly, rolling her thumbs over the rapidly stiffening nipples. Asami rocked back and forth at the stimulation, stoking the arousal and dampness mounting between Cora's thighs. "I want to see you, too." Reluctantly, Cora sat up and allowed Asami to slide her jacket over her head. Apart from the wraps across her breasts, her skin was plainly visible, crisscrossed with faded scars and set over taut, solid muscle. She blushed, feeling almost weathered compared to the girl pressed against her, but Asami said nothing as she found the end of the wraps and began undoing them. Asami kissed her again, pressing so close that Cora could feel the rising and falling of her chest, and was surprised to feel Asami's tongue flitting at her lips, pleading to be let in. She opened her mouth slightly and their tongues met, mixing and mingling while Cora took in her almost familiar taste. The pressure on her chest faded as the wraps fell away. Without any compression, Cora broke away to take a deep breath and look down. She was not much bigger than Asami, but the marks from the wraps in her larger, darker nipples provided more than enough contrast. Cora's face flushed as they fell into another kiss and Asami's hands found her breasts. Fingers rolled and tweaked her nipples, and Cora moaned, pushing back on Asami's mouth to deepen their kiss. Her own hands grabbed at the top of Asami's skirt, tugging lightly. After a few moments of being pressed up against one another, Cora caught the blended sense of their arousal filling the room. Her own tanginess, slick on the insides of her thighs, mixed with Asami's vaguely spicy scent and made for a heady aroma hanging in the air. Cora raked her fingers across Asami's soft, smooth back until she pulled away and stood up to shimmy her skirt down. It fell away, taking her panties at the same time, and once she stepped out of her boots all that remained were a pair of sheer silk stockings riding up past her knees. Cora laid back, propped up on her elbows to enjoy the view. Her heart began to race again, and the slight shine on Asami's thighs made her roll her hips. "Wow!" She nudged Cora's belt buckle. "Your turn." Without waiting, Asami tugged her pants down, tossing them aside while Cora pulled off her nearly soaked-through panties. They paused for a moment to look at one another, their reticence forgotten, and Asami fell back onto the bed, grabbing Cora and pulling her close until they were both on their sides. "I think you're pretty beautiful, too." Cora blushed, and she gasped when Asami took her hand and put it between her legs, above the tops of the stockings. The skin under her small tuft of black hair flushed red, and both of them trembled at the contact. "Please don't let this end. Touch me, Cora, I want to feel you." Her heart skipped a beat, and Cora shifted closer on the bed, slowly running her fingers along Asami's warm, slick folds the same way she liked to touch herself. A long, low moan spurred her on, and Cora brushed on her clit, smiling at the wetness slowly coating her hand. A few locks of Asami's hair fell out of place as she twitched, obscuring her view as she gazed up at Cora, lost in the throes of her own pleasure. Her hips rocked, desperate for the contact, while she took Cora's free hand and placed it around her throat, applying gentle pressure. "Good, just like that," she said, hiking up her leg to give Cora more room. "Ah, harder." The words devolved into happy groans and whimpers as Cora picked up her pace, moving her fingers in a wider arc, pressing the smallest bit harder. Asami responded in kind, nuzzling into Korra's shoulder and lightly biting her collarbone. Heat and desire flared in Korra, almost blazing as it mounted up between her legs, but her hands were occupied and Asami was in her own world, murmuring and flitting her tongue at Korra's neck. With the smallest push, Korra slid 2 fingers into Asami, who pitched her head back and moaned. Her legs shook while she clamped down on Korra's fingers, warm walls squeezing and slipping while her fingers hooked slightly. She rested the heel of her hand on Asami's clit and rubbed, moving her whole hand in a building rhythm while Asami tried to keep from crying out. "Keep going, I'm." Her legs snapped shut and she grabbed at Korra's sides, nails digging in deep while she shuddered through her orgasm and pressed into the hand on her neck. Korra took the cue to tighten her grip, and Asami smiled as she stilled. "Korra," she gasped out, pulling back so she could breathe again. Slowly, Korra slipped her fingers away, still wet with Asami, and licked them clean. It was much the same as her scent, spice, and vague sweetness, intoxicating in its complexity, but Asami sliding her stockings down distracted her. "My turn." She took Korra's hands and put them over her head, wrapping the stockings around them before tying the silk to the posts of the bed's headboard. Korra tugged at the knot, but it was secure, digging the slightest bit into her wrists. Any concern she had about it melted away when Asami began trailing kisses down her wrists, to her arms, and jumping over to her lips. Korra protested when she moved away and began leaving small traces of lipstick on her skin, but fell limp when Asami took one nipple in her mouth, flitting her tongue over the stiff, sensitive flesh. Don't stop." But she did stop after a moment, working farther down Korra's quivering body, planting kiss after light kiss on her chest, her stomach, the sides of her hips, paying no mind to the scars adorning her. Finally her lips brushed on the patch of soft brown hair over Korra's legs, and Asami looked up for a brief moment. Korra quickly nodded her assent, squirming against the restraints and rolling her hips to nudge them back into contact. She could feel her arousal burning through and threatening to consume her, smell it so strongly that it forced out everything else. Conscious thought was gone, leaving her running on instinct while Asami hovered over her, so close that her breath warmed Korra's sore, desperate body. "Please," she said, her voice no more than a ragged whisper. "Asami." And then she closed the distance between them, lightly pressing her lips to Korra's clit. She gasped, electricity coursing through her, and had to keep from bucking her hips. Asami eased her tongue along Korra's folds, tracing up and down and applying light pressure in response to the moans and shivers she provoked. Korra squeezed tight at the stockings binding her wrists, lost in sensation, and the metal posts of the headboard began to twist. Asami didn't notice, instead alternating between lapping up Korra's arousal and lavishing her clit, pulling back whenever she felt Korra teetering too close. She whined and mewled, trying to push her hips up whenever they parted, but Asami hovered just out of reach, smirking while her makeup began to smudge. She put her fingers on either side of Korra's clit, pressing and releasing so agonizingly slowly that Korra felt tears building up again. "Beg," Asami murmured, tweaking her fingers to adjust the pressure. "Asami, I'm begging you," she said, her voice rising and falling in time with Asami's squeezing. "I'm begging you, please. I need to come." Satisfied with the pained, gasped plea, Asami obliged, dipping back down and lapping her tongue at Korra in slow, gentle circles. Korra pressed her hips upward, aching to feel her more deeply, gripping the silk stockings while every muscle in her body tensed. With one last flit of Asami's tongue, Korra felt the pressure in her rise to a fever pitch and then burst as her orgasm ripped through her. Pure pleasure poured out, tremors racking her arms and legs, tears snaking down her cheeks while Asami jerked back from the rush of arousal hitting her face. Sorry," Korra said shakily, still twitching as she rode out the aftershocks. Asami only smiled and crawled back up, claiming Korra's lips with her own as she undid the restraints. They fell away, and with her hands free Korra grabbed Asami around the waist, pressing them together as close as she could. Asami was so warm, so shaky, so deliciously soft that Korra wanted to hold her tight forever. Their tastes mingled in her mouth, and the raw nerves all over her only served to sharpen the sensation. Asami's leg brushed against her oversensitized clit and Korra jolted, rolling them both over onto their sides. "Don't leave," Asami whispered, running her hands through Korra's hair. "Never." Drifting slowly out of sleep and into coherence, Asami clutched at her bed sheets, reaching for Korra. She found one bare, muscled leg near her shoulder, and she nestled closer to it. A deep, relaxing sensation spread through her neck, washing away the soreness that had kept sleep from coming easily. Rain pattered against the window as she opened her eyes and saw Korra sitting up beside her, hand moving over her throat. "Hey," Asami said, looking up and blinking the sleep out of her eyes. "What time is it?" "Not sure. Sunrise was a little while ago." "Morning person?" Asami asked. "You sure like sitting over me when I wake up, don't you?" She squeezed Korra's leg and shifted under the covers. "Very much not a morning person. Mornings are evil. I got up to get some water. There were some bruises on your neck. I might have squeezed too hard." There was no good way to look at what Korra was doing with her hand, but the feeling of moisture rolling back and forth over her skin made it very clear. She had half a mind to protest, to say that she didn't need any water-bending healing, but it was too pleasant to consider. Deeply intimate, too, lying there naked while she let Korra touch one of the most vulnerable parts of her body with complete and utter trust. Finally Korra snaked the water back into a waiting container on the nightstand, satisfied with her work. "You squeezed just fine." Asami sat up, leaning on one hand, and planted her lips on Korra's, pulling her into a soft, slow kiss. She was sweet and tangy and a half-dozen other things, and Asami couldn't remember ever tasting something half so wonderful. They drifted apart, beaming with goofy grins and furtive, hungry glances. "Let me grab the paper and get us some breakfast." She hopped out of bed and made a small show of slipping on her bathrobe, guiding it onto her shoulders and cinching the waistband to accentuate her hips. Korra gave her a low growl of approval as she left the room and took the stairs two at a time to the entry hall. Part of her demanded to dwell on what had happened, to worry over the consequences, but it was a small part, and easily silenced. Her butler Hideki had already brought the newspaper in to keep it away from the rain, and Asami grabbed it from the table in the foyer before poking her head into the kitchen. He was there, preparing a noodle soup with some fresh beef and vegetables. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, doling out a ladleful of soup into a bowl. "It sure is. That smells good, make up 2 bowls. And 2 glasses of soy milk." There was a brief moment where he pondered the unusual request, but then made the second bowl and poured the milk. Asami piled it all onto a tray, thanked him, and whisked it away without another word. Her heart skipped a beat as she almost floated up the stairs, wondering how long it had been since she felt so good. Korra was sitting at her desk when she returned, examining the small spirit vine from the disassembled shock glove. She hadn't dressed yet, which was more than fine with Asami. Once she set down the tray, she leaned over Korra and wrapped her arms around her, taking in the scent of her hair while Korra reached back with her free hand and squeezed Asami's shoulder. "This is the power source for those gloves?" she asked. "No, it still uses a regular battery. The vines only amplify and direct the energy. Once it's passed through the vine, it's very drawn to chi paths in the body. Knocks bending out for 3 or 4 days at the standard setting. After we bought out Varick Industries, we found all of this in crates behind their research and development department." "Chi blocking made easy," Korra said, rolling the vine between her thumb and forefinger. "How much power does it produce?" "That's the tricky part." Asami took the vine in one hand and an electrode in the other. "At a low voltage, the output almost doubles. With higher voltages, it triples. The effect increases exponentially until it hits a certain limit. What happens then?" It explodes." She looked back at Asami. "These things are bombs waiting to go off? And you wear them? The gloves can't be fine-tuned in the field, and the power yield we use is well into the safe zone. We just haven't isolated the exact point where the vine undergoes rapid unplanned combustion. That's a fancy way of putting it. As long as they're put together properly and the vines aren't overloaded, they're not dangerous. Not to the user, anyway." Her assurance seemed to placate Korra, and Asami pulled her back over to the bed before getting the tray. "Beef noodle soup okay?" They sat and had their breakfast, offering bites to each other before Asami set her bowl down. Without their hormones racing, there were issues they had to discuss. "They know who you are, Korra." "Who?" "My people." I told them to find you last night before I came home. Asami ran her hands through her hair. I don't know what Mako's doing, but the council has to be looking, too. I already ran into the police, they were on my boat. One of them scorched my jacket. And now the Equalists are hunting me, too. Well, this is probably the last place they would look, Asami said, but Korra was already holding her head in her hands, rocking back and forth as she drew her knees up under her chin. Hey, Korra, look at me. You'll be okay. Yulo, no. Asami grabbed the newspaper from the nightstand, eyes widening as she read the headline. Northern Water Tribe Chief Assassinated. Korra took the paper, hands trembling so badly that it fell into her lap. No, 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 no. I thought I had more time, what are they doing? Take a breath, who's they? More time for what? She put a hand over her mouth, blinking back tears. I don't think you want to know all the nasty details. They shifted on the bed, and Asami took Korra's hands in hers. You trusted me before with your life. Trust me now. Korra swallowed the lump in her throat and took a deep breath. Okay. I came to Republic City to work through my airbending block and to kill the people I told you about. The Council, the police commanders, the United Forces generals and admirals. I didn't know you had killed Amon already, but he was on my list, too. First I got over my airbending problem. Turns out I just needed to be protecting someone. Me for all the distaste she held for holier-than-thou air nomads and their bending, she couldn't help but feel somewhat flattered. Asami laced their fingers together. Yeah. Then there was the bigger issue. I staked out City Hall, the police headquarters, the naval base at the northern docks. Every night we weren't doing something, I did that, looking for openings. But the whole time, what you had told me kept nagging at me. Asami cocked her head. What you said about power vacuums. About the remaining Equalists all rallying behind you as their new leader. What would stop that from happening on a larger scale, over and over again? I tried to keep from thinking about it, but I couldn't, Korra said, her gaze slipping back to the newspaper. I've always been told how oppressive government systems are, but, seeing those counselors bicker like that? I'm surprised they can even run the United Republic, let alone oppress anyone. The Avatar is supposed to be a force for good, for balance. What good would a constant cycle of murders do? The Avatar shouldn't be a murderer. Tears trickled down her face. And I found out my parents were still alive. Tenzin told me. My father's even the chief of the Southern Water Tribe. They let me believe that I killed my parents in a fire 20 years ago. Who let you believe that? Zahir and the others. The Red Lotus. The people who raised me after that. Her voice began to crack. Asami looked at the scars crisscrossing Korra's body. I thought they were my family. They lied to me about everything. They stole my childhood so they could turn me into some kind of weapon. Asami untangled their hands and put her arms around Korra, cradling her. This poor girl, she thought. You're not a weapon, understand? You're a person. What did you mean when you said you thought you had more time? Korra nuzzled into Asami's shoulder, holding tightly onto her. Republic City was supposed to be their staging area to hit the other countries. It's close to everything else, plus most of the Air Nation is here. I was supposed to clear the way for them. But they started already, I don't know why. Well, not for nothing, but Chief Unalaq wasn't exactly beloved. It might not be them. The timing isn't a coincidence, it has to be them. Even if it isn't, they'll be coming here. Okay. Let's get dressed and we can get this figured out. There might be something the council can do about this. They got up out of bed and picked up the clothes they had strewn about the night before. I can't believe that going to the government actually sounds like a good idea right now, Korra said, examining some singing on the sleeve of her jacket. Hope they don't mind that I beat up some of their officers. Hey, do you have any more wraps? These are trashed. We're almost the same size, why don't you pick something out of the drawer there? Take whatever you like, I'm sure they'll hold up a little better than your wraps. She was looking through the dresser, cocking an eyebrow at all the lace on the bras, when the phone rang. Asami took it from its hook, wondering who would call her on her day off. Sato. It's Fu. We searched the boat and watched it all night, the Avatar never showed up. Her heart fell out of her chest. Reality came flooding back in, consequences and all. She tried to speak, but the words seemed caught. All the color from her face drained away, and Korra gave her a concerned look. There was one of those airbending designs painted on the deck, though. A Begwa circle, she asked, choking it out. Yeah. We're on our way to search the temple. Don't worry, we'll find her. The line went dead. Check the description for the links to the author.